Melburnians have spent their first night under curfew as the nation's second largest city faces some of the toughest restrictions since the Second World War. Seeking to slow the high rate of community transmission of COVID-19 in Victoria, Premier Daniel Andrews has declared a state of disaster, giving police sweeping powers to enforce Stage 4 restrictions. As well as a nighttime curfew, the New Zealand-style lockdown sees limits on how and when and where people can shop and exercise.
Well, let's take a quick look at exactly what has changed in Melbourne and Victoria. Melbourne will now be placed under a nightly curfew running from 8 p.m. until 5 a.m, with people only allowed to travel for work and caregiving. The city is also being brought under Stage 4 restrictions, meaning outside exercise will be limited to 1 hour a day within 5 kilometres from home. Shopping will also be restricted to one person per household with the same 5 kilometre boundary. By Wednesday, all school children will return to remote learning, with some exemptions for vulnerable students and special schools. Childcare centres and kindergartens will also be closed. There will be exemptions for the children of essential workers, but the government is still working out who fits into that category.
Now, from Thursday, the rest of the state will join the Mitchell Shire at Stage 3 restrictions, meaning people can only leave home for work, exercise, caregiving or to buy essential supplies. Restaurants, pubs and gyms will all close, and regional schools will also revert back to remote learning, although some exemptions will be allowed.
Today, there's going to be some more bad news, I'm afraid, as the state government announces which industries will be shut down. The prospect of an even tougher lockdown led to long queues at supermarkets, and regional Victoria isn't going to be spared, moving to Stage 3 restrictions from Thursday. So let's get more from our reporters, Stephanie Ferrier in Melbourne and Ashley Aldridge in Wodonga on the Victoria-New South Wales border. Steph, I'm going to start with you. There's so much to absorb here, but talk us through these new Stage 4 restrictions. What do they include?
Yes, good morning, Lisa. Well, we've just finished our first nighttime curfew a couple of hours ago, and today Victorians will be starting their first official full day in the state of disaster. Now, here in Melbourne, we're going to be living under these tough new Stage 4 restrictions for the next 6 weeks. Now, they include that nighttime curfew from 8 p.m. till 5 a.m. every day, as well as for shopping for essential items. People can only go within 5 kilometres of their home to go and get their groceries or to the closest available supermarket, and that will have to be only one person per household and only once a day. For exercise, you can only go out within that 5 kilometre radius again from your home only once a day and only for a maximum of 1 hour. For school children, it's a return to remote learning for all school children, including years 11 and 12 VCE students, unless you've got an exemption as a vulnerable student or if your parents are essential workers. And that's the same situation with childcares and kinders that will be closed except for those exemptions. Now, weddings will be scrapped unless there is a compassionate reason for having to go ahead, but funerals will still be able to continue. And the state's Chief Health Officer, Professor Brett Sutton, has described this as a shock and awe campaign to really try to curb these coronavirus numbers, with some 671 mystery cases out there in the community where they just cannot find the source of the infection. It also follows another grim day of figures yesterday, with 7 deaths and 671 new cases.
Steph, I don't know about you, but I reckon it knocked the wind out of a lot of people getting that news yesterday afternoon. How do you reckon the mood's going to be today?
Yes, well, there definitely was a feeling of just a really flat feeling yesterday afternoon when this news came through. And even though a lot of people were pleased that at least something is being done and they hope that things at least will be able to get on top of these coronavirus numbers. In fact, some people were saying that they would have hoped that we had have done this 3 weeks ago so we didn't waste the last 3 weeks in lockdown. But there's still that real sense of despondency out there. And of course, when I was speaking to people last night, they were saying saying that they were really having to rush to try and get to the stores and to the grocery stores just before that curfew started. However, Premier Daniel Andrews has said that there is absolutely no need for panic buying here, notwithstanding some of those queues that we saw yesterday afternoon. He says that places like supermarkets and other essential food item stores like groceries, butchers, bakeries, they'll still be allowed to open, as well as pharmacies, so don't panic. However, the government is expected to announce today what sort of industries will be closed and exactly how some of these workplaces will be affected. So we're going to have some more information on that in News Breakfast a little later on.
Okay, thanks, Steph. Ashley, we've been checking in with you over the last few weeks as the border closed and people in that area were facing a lot of challenges in Albury-Wodonga, but now there are going to be even more restrictions. Tell us what regional Victoria is facing.
That's right. As of midnight on Wednesday, regional Victoria will return to stage 3 restrictions, which is what Melbourne had been experiencing in the past 3 weeks. So this will mean that there will now only be 4 reasons that you can leave your home. That is to shop for food and essential items, for care and caregiving, for exercise or for work and learning if you cannot do that from home. As Steph mentioned, students across the state will return to remote and online learning. Now, we also know that places such as gyms and beauty salons will have to close their doors once again, while cafes and restaurants will return to delivery or takeaway style operations. There will also be restrictions on visitors. You won't be allowed to have anyone inside your home, and you will only be able to gather with one person outside of your home.
How are people taking the news?
As you mentioned, it's been a tough few weeks for people living in the regions, especially border communities like Albury-Wodonga. So far, people have been quite positive this morning. We did catch up with a few people earlier. Here's a bit of what they had to say.
It's just something we have to do, isn't it? If everyone abides by the rules and does the right thing, then hopefully we can all get through this together.
I think everyone's just got to get together and bite the bullet and get through it. It's just a mask at the end of the day. I think people need to just suck it up and bang one on.
So as you can hear there, people are being quite positive this morning. Everybody we've seen out so far is wearing their mask, and the feeling is that if we can just get on top of it in the regions, we perhaps won't have to face those really tight restrictions that you are experiencing down in Melbourne.
Yeah, so suck it up and bang one on. I think that's the advice that we can put out there to people today. Thank you to both of you. We'll check back in again as the morning goes on. Well, from tomorrow, Australians on unemployment benefits will have to take a job if they're offered one or risk losing their payments. But the federal government says there will be an exemption for Victorians receiving JobSeeker, as they won't be required to search for work during Victoria's extended lockdown. Meanwhile, business groups in the state are seeking an extension of the full JobKeeper wage subsidy, which is due to begin scaling down shortly after its new 6-week phase of tighter restrictions.
The US Centre for Disease Control has confirmed an increase of nearly 60,000 coronavirus cases in the country, taking its total to more than 4.6 million. Meanwhile, India's Home Affairs Minister Amit Shah has been admitted to hospital after testing positive to coronavirus. And the Philippines government is bringing back stricter forms of quarantine to Manila's metropolitan area.
Papua New Guinea's emergency controller has called the country's current daily increase in COVID-19 cases alarming. PNG has now recorded 110 cases, with 98 detected in just over a fortnight. The majority are inpatients and health workers at Port Moresby's General Hospital. The PNG government has repeatedly warned there aren't enough hospital beds or staff to manage a large outbreak.
The Bushfire Royal Commission is set to examine the way Australia has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic when it resumes hearings in Canberra this morning. The focus on coronavirus will come as the commissioners will examine aspects of the country's disaster arrangements, including how decisions are made and how national resources are shared. The commission was announced back in February following the Black Summer bushfires that destroyed thousands of homes on the eastern seaboard.
There are fresh claims the spread of conspiracy theories about 5G wireless technology could be the work of hostile state actors. While the theory of a link between coronavirus and 5G has been dismissed as baseless, it's spread rapidly on social media. Communications Minister Paul Fletcher has told Four Corners it's likely foreign governments are to blame.
I think we'd be naive if we did not recognise the possibility that some of these claims are being generated by hostile governments or by others who have a motive to try and create instability and disorder in democracies like Australia.
Well, the New South Wales Premier has warned the state is in a critical stage in its battle against coronavirus and has urged people to wear masks in public places if they're not confident they can socially distance.
For more, reporter Antoinette Collins joins us from Sydney. Antoinette, good morning. Yes, a shift in strategy in New South Wales on mask wearing.
That's right, Michael. Good morning. The Premier in New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, says while she's stressing it's not yet mandatory or compulsory for people to wear masks, it is now strongly recommended. And that's as the state reaches a very make or break period, she says, over the next few weeks. Now, this is a change. It was optional and then it became suggested. And now this recommendation on the advice of health authorities here really shows the fear of the transmission rate increasing here in New South Wales within the community, as well as what is happening in Victoria. It is this next stage now in this risk mitigation strategy here in New South Wales as they really try to get on top of that community transmission. So now people are being urged to wear masks when they're in enclosed spaces, such as on public transport, if they're buying groceries, if they work in customer-facing roles, if they attend a place of worship, and if they are in those areas where there is a high rate of community transmission. Now, indeed, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, heeded the advice of the Premier yesterday. He posted on Instagram a selfie of him inside his car with a mask on as he popped out to the shops to buy a few things, and he strongly encouraged other people to do the same. Now, it comes as the health authorities also say that this is also has to be done in conjunction with all of those other elements of risk mitigation, including social distancing, staying at home if you're ill and getting tested, and good hand hygiene.
Now, a fresh health alert has been issued for Newcastle, north of Sydney. What do we know about that?
So we know that confirmation of a confirmed Sydney case went to Newcastle on the 29th and 30th of July while infectious. It's understood that person visited Hotel Jesmond in Newcastle on the 29th of July between 7:30 and 9:30, and Wallsend Diggers the day after between 7:30 and 9:30 again. Now, anyone who attended those venues on those days is being told to self-isolate for 14 days and get tested, and even if that test is negative, to stay in that isolation period. Now, the Hunter New England Health District is in contact with the venues. They will be trying to contact other patrons as well, and they're undergoing a deep clean, as is the Toronto Courthouse in Lake Macquarie, where a confirmed case visited there on the 27th of July. Now, yesterday, New South Wales recorded 12 new cases. 3 of those are linked to the Apollo restaurant in Potts Point, which is a hotspot cluster. 2 linked to the Mounties Club at Mount Pritchard. And now there's a new case. 2 childcare workers from the Advanced Early Learning Centre in Maryland have tested positive, and investigations as to the source of that infection is underway. We don't know the cause or if that's linked to any of those other cases at the moment.
OK, Antoinette Collins, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on the situation in New South Wales. Now, the tough new measures in Melbourne and Victoria are, of course, grim news for the federal government as it tries to kickstart the national economy. Matt Doran is at Parliament House for us this morning. Matt, good morning. We heard the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, telling us a little earlier that the government is considering a couple of things.
That's right, Michael. If they are trying to kickstart the national economy, they might need to get the jumper leads out this morning as we see the state of Victoria go into those extended lockdown restrictions. Josh Frydenberg has been asked quite repeatedly over the last few days, and some of his colleagues as well, as to whether or not some of those existing payments, namely the coronavirus wage subsidy scheme called JobKeeper, would be extended in its current form beyond the end of September. It is after the end of September September due to start being pared back from a $1,500 a week payment per worker per fortnight to a $1,200 for a payment for workers, full-time workers, and $750 a fortnight for part-time workers. But given the situation in Victoria, you've got industry groups in that state saying that that payment should continue at that $1,500 rate for much longer, considering the financial strife that Victorian businesses will be facing. Josh Frydenberg has been reluctant to commit to that extended rate, but he has given a few hints here on News Breakfast as to whether the eligibility requirements for businesses, in other words, what level of financial strife they have to show that they are experiencing, whether that could be tweaked to allow more businesses access to the scheme beyond the end of the September month.
You may have had Victorian businesses, Michael, that were not eligible for JobKeeper in the June period because, for example, they had strong retail sales in May or June, but they are obviously in this September period seeing a lot of hardship. So in that case, we are looking at some flexibility around the eligibility requirements for JobKeeper for businesses beyond the end of September.
OK, that's JobKeeper. What about JobSeeker, the unemployment benefit? Can we expect, Matt, changes on that front?
Well, the only change that we're seeing at this stage is an exemption for Victorians who are receiving that unemployment benefit to having to go out and look for jobs. These so-called mutual obligations, if we're using the Commonwealth jargon there, were due to kick in across the country from today. So the requirement for people to prove that they are out there looking for work and that they are accepting job offers if they are presented to them, that will come into force everywhere but Victoria, given that understanding that if you aren't meant to be leaving your home in Victoria or travelling further than that 5 kilometre radius, then generally you can't go out there looking for jobs as well. So that's the only exemption that or any change to that payment that we're seeing from the federal government on JobSeeker. So we'll wait to see whether or not there are any other financial support mechanisms that are put in place by the Commonwealth. We might get more of a steer on that throughout the day as we get a better idea of what business restrictions could be put in place in Victoria from the state government there. But we do know that the Commonwealth would be very keen to see any dollar figure that they put forward matched by the Victorian Government for that ongoing support.
Matt Doran at Parliament House, thank you. So we want to hear from you. If you're a Victorian viewer, certainly as a Melbourne viewer, we should point out that we asked the Premier Daniel Andrews to come on the show this morning. We're told by his office he is not doing individual interviews. We will keep asking on your behalf as the week goes on because he is the man everybody wants to hear from to help explain what is going on in Melbourne and Victoria for the next 6 weeks. But you got the sense of desolation, people feeling very flat when that announcement was made yesterday, Lisa.
And on the other side, there are people who are relieved that a decision's been made because we were waiting for those press conferences each day, seeing those numbers climbing, or at least even if they dropped off a bit, not enough to make us feel that we were making any headway. So there is that sense as well. But also, how are we all going to get through this? This doesn't end at the state borders and it's going to affect all of Australia. Certainly Josh Frydenberg talking about the money-wise.
Most importantly, we want to hear from you this morning. RAM has chipped in. We should have gone to stage 4 weeks ago. It could well be too late now and we have to accept the pandemic in Victoria. Let's all hope for a vaccine. Ken says, as a resident of Victoria, I am extremely annoyed by the latest declaration. Obviously, there is a disease issue that must be managed, but Ken reckons all of this going to stage 4 is a huge overreaction. Please, love to get your views. Our email address is breakfast@your.abc.net.au and you can join the conversation as well on Facebook and Twitter.